What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Gators Online Recruiting Show. I am Keith Niebuhr. That is Blake Alderman. We're going to talk a little official visit right now. This is a big official visit weekend for the Florida Gators. They've already had one, and it was kind of, I don't want to say the practice run, Blake, but it really wasn't the big one. There were 7 or 8 guys. This week, there's going to be 18 guys coming in for official visits. This is when things really get rolling. Would you agree with that?
I would agree. I kind of dubbed it as the shoot your shot weekend for Florida, that May 16th weekend. Obviously, they did land a commitment out of that weekend, so that puts them at 2 commits, but much bigger, much deeper cast of guys this weekend. And, a lot of these guys, I feel like this is one of those weekends where we, when you look back and you kind of reassess, what weekends were productive for Florida, whether it be anything that happens during, after, or down the road. I feel like this weekend, there's a lot of names that I could see end up in Florida's class. So it seems like this, if it's not this weekend, eventually, I think we can look back and think like, oh man, this was a pretty successful weekend for Florida.
All right, so here's the plan. I'm going to list off the 18 guys. And Blake, I don't think there's a new one that just kind of developed before we recorded this show. So I'm not going to have that name. You're going to add that one at the end. And then we'll pick 5 or 6 guys to really kind of dig deep into their recruitments. We don't really have time to get into all 18 deep. And we also know that you probably don't want to watch us for that long time either. So let's go with the list right here, Blake. I'll start it off. I'll just run right through and then we'll get back to the breakdown. The headliner really is 5-star safety Brilan Womack out of Brandon, Mississippi's Hartfield Academy. Like I said, we'll dig into that one in a little bit, but we know that he's got a really good relationship with first-year co-defensive coordinator / safeties coach Vinny Cinsari. You've got 4-star cornerback CJ Bronaugh out of the Orlando area. He's a Nebraska commit. You've got 4-star defensive lineman Vodney Cleveland out of Birmingham, 4-star tight end Heze Kent, 4-star edge Jareylan McCoy. That's a big one. We're going to get back to him. 4-star edge Jari Carr, 4-star safety Caden Hall, 4-star corner CJ Hester. It's a good group. 4-star linebacker DQ Forpka of Bradenton IMG Academy, 4-star offensive tackle Javion Cooper out of Melbourne Central Catholic, 4-star linebacker. How do you pronounce Maycock's first name?
Karan
Maycock. He's an FSU commit out of Miami Central, a school that I used to love going to back down in the day. 3-star defensive lineman Tyson Bacon. That's an interesting one. Former Tennessee commit. Georgia's making a big push there too, I believe. Here's another 3-star you need to know. Interior offensive lineman Jari Carr out of Bradenton IMG Academy, but he's from Ocala. 3-star wide receiver Brian Williams. He's from Lake Mary, Florida. 3-star offensive lineman Blaze Thomasy from Baton Rouge Catholic. 3-star offensive lineman Javari Lucas out of Belglade Glade Central. He is cousins with former Gators players Fred and Kelvin Taylor. And then an edge, Corey Howard out of Valdosta, just right up the road, right across the state line on I-75 in Georgia. He will be there as well. Blake, you've got one more to add. I'll let you tell everybody who that is.
Yeah, that's 4-star defensive back Jaden Bronaugh. He is from the Boca Raton area down in Florida. He's been committed to Louisville for a couple months, but he's a guy that Florida has still recruited. I wrote about him about a month ago. His trainer actually trained Vinny Cinsari, Florida's safeties coach, co-defensive coordinator, trained him whenever he was getting ready for the NFL draft. So there's some ties there. He's been speaking with Cinsari every day. He speaks with Billy Napier. They speak with his mother. So that visit just was the most recent one confirmed. So it makes an even bigger official visit weekend even bigger.
Yeah, I mean, it's really good. Blake, before we get really rolling, I got to tell everybody, be sure to like and subscribe. Go down below, hit the like button, subscribe to this channel. And we're going to have another recruiting show later in the week. This is kind of where things really get rolling. So we're going to do a second recruiting show that will probably run Thursday, maybe Wednesday night, to really get everybody in the mood for these next 3 weekends. Again, you got this weekend, Florida's hosting, we think, as of Tuesday night recording, 18 kids. It changes. It always changes. Next weekend is going to be a big one. And then the June 13th weekend, I believe that's the day, Blake. That's going to be a really big one as well. And also in between, Florida's going to be hosting recruits too on unofficial visits. So there's a lot going on. We are going to try to keep you in the loop as much as possible. Obviously, most of the juice has got to go to GatorsOnline.com. That's who pays the bills, okay? So we always have good sign-up deals. We're not going to stiff you here. Don't worry about that. We appreciate you all too, but we do have to obviously push people, Blake, to the website too, because that's the real moneymaker. But Blake, Let me get back to this. Let's talk about some of the guys, some of the big guys that are coming in this weekend. And we start with Brilan Womack. Again, 5-star safety out of Mississippi. A lot of people think Ohio State, I don't want to steal too much of your thunder here, but a lot of people think Ohio State's the clear team to beat. He's got a sister that plays softball at Auburn, so he's over there a lot. I believe Texas A&M is also heavily involved. But Florida and his connection with Vinny Cincinnati, obviously NIL is always involved one way or the other, but this is one of those guys, a 5-star guy. You kind of assume that the top players in these recruitments are going to have similar NIL situations. So then it does actually revert back to relationships and early playing time and development and all that. What kind of chance does Florida have with Brilan Womack, Blake?
Well, I think whenever you spoke on, Ohio State is viewed as the team to beat. That's a team that he actually named his leader earlier this spring. They've been on him a long time. I think he has some comparisons to a lot of players there at Ohio State. He sees like the tradition they've had with, putting guys in the league, having some of those big time defensive backs. So they're the leader, but he's going to take these official visits. And I don't know, like Florida has made up a lot of ground. Don't get me wrong. Vinny Cincinnati was huge. He was recruiting him at Washington, and I think whenever Womack was going to name like a top 5, top 6 earlier this year, Washington was going to be in that list, but Cincinnati left and he took the job. I believe he was at Jacksonville State for a short stint there in between Washington and Florida. So Cincinnati is really the reason where this starts and ends. Their connection is really strong. I think Florida's got ground to make up there. Ohio State obviously is a clear-cut leader. He's got those ties to Auburn. He's been there a lot. I think he's only been to Florida once in the recent like earlier this year. And I think before that, it was like his freshman year or something. So not a lot of connections in general to Florida itself. So we'll see where things go with this official visit this weekend. And obviously he's got more to take, but I think Florida's got some ground to make up, at least on Ohio State. And I don't really know a pecking order past that.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I think he was one of the guys, I think you and I were both working there that weekend out in front of the building. Did he do an interview with us? He did, right?
He did, yes.
He did. Obviously the connection to Vinny Cincinnati is strong, but these are the types of battles that if Florida's truly going to take that next step, we've seen Florida begin to take steps, right? I think going 8-5 last year, finishing with the 4 straight wins, still not been ranked at the end of the season in any of Billy Napier's 3 seasons, but Florida seems to be on that upward trend. Blake, at some point in time, they've got to start winning more and more of these. You're going to have to take down Ohio State here or there. And we saw it in the last cycle where Florida did beat Georgia for a guy or two. That we're starting to see more of those, but to really become that elite program again. I mean, Urban Meyer was winning these types of battles, right? I mean, he was.
Right.
So we'll see if Florida can kind of make another move. Again, it's one of those places when people visit, they either love it or it's just not clicking with them. But if they love it, they really love it. And the official boost, Florida, I would say, is one of those schools that maybe gets more of a boost from the official visits than a lot of schools, quite frankly. Next up, Blake, I want to talk about this one. This is a really interesting one. Vodney Cleveland, 4-star defensive lineman from Birmingham Parker, really good program. I believe that's the school right next to Legion Field, where the first few SEC championship games were played, just the west side of Birmingham. And, wasn't that long ago that I think Florida was considered by some people, including some of us at On3 and Gators Online, we thought Florida was probably the team to beat with maybe Auburn next. But he took one visit to Texas, Blake, and now there's some real confidence emanating from the Lone Star. I almost said the Longhorn State, but the Lone Star State. And, obviously, he's a big kid, and Florida just picked up a big kid that can play nose. And so I wanted to get your opinion on this. What kind of shot does Florida have with Vodney Cleveland? And does the fact that Florida just landed Perez, and you're going to have to remind me of his first name, last week, does that impact this recruitment at all?
I don't think so. JJ Perez is Florida's most recent commit. He's more of a, those nose tackle, big body types. And that's kind of what Vodney Cleveland is too. He's got some versatility. That's what Florida really wants on defensive linemen. He's going to be one of those guys that can play the 0, the 1 as a nose, but has a little bit of he has some wiggle to play the 3 and the 4 eye. So he's got some versatility there. That's what has him such a, high priority for Florida. I saw it as a Florida Auburn battle for a while there too. He's a former Alabama commit, backed off that early on. Obviously, the in-state ties with Auburn there. He's taken that official visit. I believe he has an uncle that played at Auburn or some kind of family tie there to Auburn. But it does seem like that kind of Florida Auburn battle buzz is starting to fade, and it's going into more of a Texas-Florida battle, at least for right now, as he continues to take these official visits. Texas does have the buzz. Florida was the #1 school. He named them his leader after visiting for the spring Orange and Blue spring game back in April. I believe he took 2 visits earlier this year for Junior Day. So Florida's gotten all these visits kind of stacked up. They've made a big push. Now the others are starting to make these pushes as well. So it's now starting to turn in that battle we see during official visit season. I do think Florida's in the mix there, but obviously these visits he takes, you'll talk NIL, you'll talk all sorts of things. You'll, spend time with coaches that you're getting to know, whether you've had 1 visit or 2 visits, 3 visits in the past. So there's a lot still to play out here, but I do see him as someone that Florida's as legitimately in the mix for. I think you're muted.
Yep, I was muted.
There we go.
Hey, look, if there's not at least 4 or 5 technical difficulties during one of my shows, then you're missing out. But this was one of those things. I think, Auburn just hosted them on an official visit, I believe, right, Blake?
Correct.
And I think there was some feeling at Auburn that they might have made a little bit of move, that they clawed their way back into it based on his comments. But some other people that have knowledge of this recruitment think that maybe that's not the case. And again, like you said, that it has become a Florida-Texas battle. So what might give Texas the edge? I mean, he's only been there once. So if you're Florida, it's got to be a little bit frustrating if Texas is, in fact, in the lead now, because you've hosted him a handful of times, correct, Blake?
I think 3 or 4 all time. But
he's been to
3
Texas
this year.
Once. Yeah,
right.
He's been to Texas once. So we have heard that NIL is a big player in this recruitment, big factor in this recruitment. But then I think people assume, Texas is going to outspend Florida. Listen, again, I always revert back to this. Florida flipped 10 to 12 guys. It depends. Like Tramel Jones technically wasn't a flip last year because he decommitted from FSU and then committed to Florida. But there's a dozen guys. I mean, you're not flipping those guys if your NIL sucks, right? I mean, let's not kid ourselves here, okay? I think a lot of people are just kind of. It's still sort of, I don't know what the word is. People just don't like to say that that's had any factor in them getting a guy.
Yeah, it's kind of taboo. It's taboo to talk about NIL.
Let's be adults here, okay? Point being, if that's the case, I mean, look, relationship-wise, Gerald Chapman's connecting with recruits. He's done a pretty good job. I know people that think he's the best young assistant on the team. You've got a strong off the field staff. You got a head coach that relates well with families and recruit, whatever. You got all these things working in your favor. So now Florida's got a chance to get him back on campus, get him feeling Florida again before he goes back to Texas. Blake, do you know when he's going back to Texas, Vodney Cleveland, by chance?
I don't, but I can look it up real quick.
Yeah,
he's got a handful.
Yeah, let's dig in that. So Florida, Texas, but there is some confidence coming out of Texas. They've got a big need on the defensive line, just like they did the last cycle. And there's been some good Florida-Texas battles. Texas won most of them lately, but one that Florida did win last year was for a defensive lineman, Joseph Mbachu, out of the Atlanta area. Committed to Florida, flipped to Texas, flipped back to Florida, and signed with Florida. So, they got a little history there. So we'll see how this weekend goes. I think we're going to have a better picture probably in about a week, right? After the high of the visit to Florida wears off. But they're in it. I think his dad's heavily involved. Apparently him and they're good people to be around. I mean, you know what I mean? So Florida's got a shot. We're going to see how that one plays out. All right. Next one, Blake, I almost called you Corey, but let me see. I've got 3 guys to choose from because we want to focus on 5 guys. So how about we go with Heze Kent? 4-star tight end, I guess tight end. Some people say tight end / athlete out of Brunswick, Georgia. Again, South Georgia is a mystery to me because historically it's not been great for Florida. Oh, yeah, they've gotten some guys. And Henry McMillan was from Folkestone about 30 years ago, which isn't far from Brunswick. Got a couple guys out of Valdosta. Peach County, Jaquez Green, DeMarcus Robinson. I mean, Florida's gotten guys, but Georgia's gotten 100 guys, out of the same area, maybe more. So, and Auburn too, and Alabama too, and FSU. So Florida is not even really, I wouldn't think, in the top 3 or 4 historically in what we would consider South Georgia. But Heze Kent feels like Florida's doing pretty well with him. What would you say, Blake?
I would agree. I think that Russ Callaway, Florida's offensive coordinator / tight ends coach, has done a really good job. I think Florida's of this Final 5 of Alabama's not in there anymore. Florida, Florida State, Miami, Georgia Tech, and Texas. I would say that Florida's been has hosted him by far more than anybody else. And he's a big body, and when you say tight end / athlete, like that's a good way to explain him, because if you see this guy, you think he could be an offensive lineman, but he's got that big body. He's athletic. He really only wants to hear, these schools that are his finalists. These are the ones that are telling him, that they see him as a tight end. So Florida likes those big size guys, those guys that are a combination of, someone who can help run game with blocking, and they can go out and catch the passes. And that's kind of what his fit is. You see his Heze Kent's film, and I think it's one of his first clips on his junior film where he's taking like a snaps out of the backfield as a running back. And clearly this isn't a guy that's going to do that at the college level, but it's encouraging to see a guy that's pushing like 300 pounds that looks like an offensive tackle have that sort of movement and be able to do those types of things. So I personally see this as a Miami-Florida battle. Those are two teams that I've heard the most about. He's visited both of those a lot of times. I think Russ Callaway has done a really good job, like I said, and he also, I believe he was the head coach of Brunswick, or a coach at Brunswick's wedding. So they have longstanding ties. Callaway is a South Georgia guy himself. So I think Florida's in this one. Like I said, I think it's them against Miami, but we've got official visits still to play out. He's going to visit a lot of these other schools. I think Texas is probably a dark horse if there is one, but July 12th will be his commitment date. So I'm watching those two teams right now.
Okay. We need to point out with Vodney Cleveland, I think late June is when he's supposed to announce. I want to say the fourth.
I'm not sure. That's I believe summertime decision for him.
And I want to also say that Vodney Cleveland's official visits coming up after Florida, the week after. Georgia still hanging around in that recruitment. You never count them out. Texas would be the weekend of June 13th. And then Miami, the weekend of June 20th. And Miami's been able to pull a few rabbits out of its hat with some recruits too. So maybe there's still some more to shake out with Vodney Cleveland. Speaking of Russ Callaway, he actually was born, I want to say, up in North Georgia in Athens, but he has a lot. You're right. Like, he's really kind of, him and Billy Napier probably have more ties, or as many ties as anyone in the state of Georgia on this staff. Let me think about that. Rob Sale coached in Georgia, but Napier from there, basically. Dad coached there, brother coached there. Russ Callaway from there, Jalukas from Louisiana, Billy Gonzalez, not really in Georgia.
What are Duran's from Louisiana?
Yeah.
Vinny's from up in like Pennsylvania and has moved around as a coach's son. But
DeCoster's from South Florida. Yeah, I'm thinking about this.
I think that those are two of the ones that
Mike Peterson would maybe be the next guy, because he coached at South Carolina, and his brother, I want to say his brother played at Georgia Southern. So he's got some connections up there too. But I would say on the Florida staff, there's probably nobody better connected in the state of Georgia. Then that's a conversation for another day. But then Russ Callaway, who I'm trying to decide who writes about him more, you or our coworker Corey Bender. It's like it's a chase. But he is involved in a lot of recruitments, and I'm just teasing you, Blake, but they mention him. Recruits mention Russ Callaway all the time. He's one of the more likable guys on staff, more personable. They're all likable, but one of the more affable guys, right? So he connects well with recruits. All right, next up, we've gone over three guys, right? Brilan Womack, Vodney Cleveland, Heze Kent. All right, let's do – this is a good one. CJ – how do you pronounce his name? CJ Bronaugh?
Yep.
All right, cornerback from he's from Winter Garden, but he goes to high school in Windermere, Florida. I don't even think this high school was there when I grew up, but goes to high school in Windermere. Really good player, defensive back, committed in Nebraska, fast as the wind, right? So what's going on with CJ Bronaugh's recruitment? Because I know FSU's heavily involved. Seems like a lot of schools have really jumped in on this dude. Like, he's a stock-up guy to a lot of coaching staff. So tell me the latest on CJ Bronaugh.
Yeah, you mentioned he's a D guy. I think personal record, I think early this year at Florida Relays was like a 10.24 in the 100 or something around there. He's a fast guy. Like, the speed is what has attracted all these schools. And he does play at a small league. I think 1A football, I think, is what Windermere plays in. And he's a guy that had 3 pick sixes last year. He's got the speed. He's definitely been a stock-up guy. And I think Deron Wilson really kind of kicked this off. Florida's cornerbacks coach, the first-year guy there. Hired in the spring, offered, I think, somewhere around there. Florida gets him on campus. I think they've hosted him another time, and now they have the official visit. And he's been committed in Nebraska since I think like around November of last year. But he still kept the door open. Obviously, Nebraska had a lot of those coaching changes. Some of those guys even went to FSU. So FSU, you mentioned them. They're in play. I think that Florida and FSU, I have a hard time seeing this guy stick with Nebraska in the end. It's just a guy from the Sunshine State, committed in Nebraska. That's a long ways away. He's going to take these official visits. I think Penn State will also host him as well. So I think Florida's done a really good job. I think they're the biggest threat if there is one. Florida State being one of those other threats too. And he wants to take the official visits. The way I had him explain to me was he's, parents and family and him are going into these official visits as kind of a business approach. They want to hear these schools out, make the informed decision after taking these visits. So still some weeks left to have all these things and all these pieces fall into place. But I think Florida's done an excellent job. I think Wilson has built a really fast connection with him. They speak like every day, a couple times a day. So he feels wanted at Florida. He's got a lot of the intangibles that they want as a player with speed and length and like ball playability and just what he can do there. Like he's a game changer type of guy. So I think Florida's in a really good spot.
Deron Wilson. I got to keep saying it over and over. In a short period of time, we're hearing a lot of good things about him. And, it's interesting. He worked for a guy that I know really well at Arkansas, T-Will, Travis Williams, the defensive coordinator out there. And the rave reviews, people just think this guy, you could say, oh, well, what did they really do at Arkansas? Well, maybe they didn't have the guys too. I mean, so a lot of it's, do you have the dudes or not? But the feedback from people out there was all positive. And so far, I had questions because Florida had another cornerbacks coach last year recruiting, Will Harris, now at Miami. The year before that, you had Corey Raymond. So 3 different guys recruiting cornerbacks in 3 years. So where if you're at another school, maybe you've built a relationship with some of these guys in this class for 1, 2, 3 years. He was kind of coming in because at Arkansas, and he had a pit stop at Georgia State, but at Arkansas, you're just probably not recruiting the same guys. I mean, you're trying, but you're not getting, you may get a guy here or there, but by and large, you're not recruiting against Florida. So to come in this quickly or come in a short amount of time, kind of make some progress with these guys. And obviously, it's not just him. It's the program. It's Billy Napier. It's DJ Lagway. It's that Florida seems to be on an upward trend. It's NIL. It's academics. It's Gatorade. It's all these factors. Don't get me wrong. He's just one piece, but it's a big piece because kids want to be developed. They're all making money now. So again, it then reverts back to who can develop me, get me the NFL, who makes my parents and family feel comfortable with, around me and around them and all that stuff. And so he's been able to do that. When you look, Blake, at what Florida's doing at cornerback in this cycle, obviously they don't have any commitments yet, but maybe trending in the right direction with CJ Bronaugh, maybe trending in the right direction with another guy that's visiting this weekend, CJ Hester. We can talk about him in a second. And then also maybe trending up with Chauncey Kennan of Sarasota. So he may not even have to leave the state of Florida, which is ideal if you ask me. I mean, I always thought it was ridiculous to see staffs at Florida and another school I covered flying halfway across the country to get guys you can get 40 miles from home. So CJ Hester, that leads us into that. We're not going to put up a photo, but another guy that Florida leads for, 4-star cornerback from Cocoa. Not many schools have been better for the Florida Gators historically than Cocoa. What can you tell us about CJ Hester's recruitment, Blake?
Florida offered last year, was immediately his number one school. He is building connection with Will Harris. Florida consistently was number one. Then obviously you have Coach Harris leave to go to Miami. You bring in Deron Wilson. There was a little bit of a lull where he was kind of unsure, and that's kind of common with a lot of these guys. If you have a coaching change, you don't know who the guy is going to be for a while. And then new guy gets in, and you may or may not have a connection. But I think that Wilson has done a good job. Another guy, daily contact with him, making him feel wanted. Billy Napier already had a really good connection with CJ Hester. So it's just like all these guys there at Florida are making him a priority. He's felt that way. So Florida's led for a while. I think Florida has a pretty wide lead. I think if I had to pick a number 2 right now for him, I'd say it's probably Syracuse. He really likes Fran Brown and how he's got that history of being a really strong defensive back coach, developing guys when he was at Georgia. And Fran Brown's been known as a really good recruiter. So now there's the Georgias. Then there's, let's see who else. Miami's in there. Iowa's another school that was a little random, but you look at just like what they've done with putting guys in the league there. But I think if there's a team that has some upward mobility, it's maybe Georgia. That's one team that he likes a lot. But I think right now Florida's got a pretty wide lead over Syracuse, who I would view being in second place. Okay.
We're going to talk about one more guy, and then I'm kind of going to ask you about who could maybe drop this weekend, who could drop, pop, whatever the word we're looking for. But we're going to do one quick promo. Again, be sure to hit like and subscribe and leave a comment down below. And also check out GatorsOnline.com today. Look, we're going to have a lot of stuff this week. We're going to have a lot of stuff this weekend. We do these live threads through the weekend, and we're not just posting Instagram photos. We're giving you real intel throughout the weekend, and they've been a huge hit for the last couple of years. People subscribe solely for that information that they're getting in real time during big official visit weekends. We got people on the inside. We got all kinds of good stuff coming this week. So make sure you check out GatorsOnline.com. All right, let me go back to Gators hosting huge weekend. And we got one more guy to talk about, Blake, and then we'll wrap it up with some predictions maybe from you. I can't pronounce his name. Jareylan McCoy. Did I get it? All right. 4-star defensive lineman from Tupelo, Mississippi. I've been there before. I've stayed there every time I've been to a Florida Ole Miss game in Oxford. It's right down the road. Elvis's birthplace. You can go to the house. I've done it. Cool little town. And interestingly enough, he was committed to LSU, which is Ole Miss's big rival, one of their two biggest rivals. And now he's not committed to anyone. And Florida's the team to beat, but we could have another Florida-Texas battle. Whereas maybe Texas leads right now for Vodney Cleveland. I mean, it depends on who you ask about that one. Most people think that Florida probably leads for Jareylan McCoy. He's coming in this weekend, and then I think he visits Texas either the week or I think it is the week after that. And he's going to have a decision pretty soon. So Jareylan McCoy, Blake, is Florida close to getting this done, or is Texas a real threat?
I think Texas is a real threat. I think those are the two teams that I'm watching. I think LSU is still in there, and he's going to visit Ole Miss too. And like you said, he's from right down the road from Oxford. So June 1st, I believe, is his commitment date. Excuse me, sorry, not June 1st, July 1st. My mistake. Right. That's his commitment date that he's got set. I think Florida goes and tries to go for the jugular this weekend. I think that they push. They want to get that done. There's been some buzz that's at least something to watch out for. I know we'll get into some guys that, just who to watch this weekend. This is going to be one of them. I think that Florida's done an excellent job. He did say to me whenever I spoke with him last that Florida and Texas did stand out a little bit more. But I think one thing to keep in mind is this guy visited for like a 2-3 day stay earlier this spring, and he had his dad with him. When he visited Texas for his first time in the spring, he was by himself. So when he goes through these official visits, he'll have, dad, mom, sister. All of his family will be with him. So he's going to have his family see all these schools. He already really likes Florida. And I don't know that at the end of the day, he's the one that has to go to college. He's the one that's going to have to live and go through, 6 a.m. lifts and all these, that, and the other. But it's something where he wants his family to, just have the input, feel comfortable with the decision. So I think that it's a positive that Florida's had his dad there. That's just something that, Florida's been able to work on the family there too. I'd give Florida the edge. I don't know, how this weekend will play out. I think that he's at least someone definitely to watch. Like I said, I think they try to push for a decision, but I do think that Texas is a threat. We've seen Texas get guys on campus. NIL is a thing there. They're another team that's on an upward trend. So we'll see, but I do think that he's one to watch. Yeah,
kind of cool to see these Florida-Texas battles. I mean, they went into the SEC. Florida gets a guy like Lagway. Florida's always gotten a guy here or there out of Texas, but they're really starting to cross paths a lot, and they're heavily involved again in the state of Florida this cycle. Their quarterback, Diabell, quarterback commitment is from Fort Lauderdale. They're involved with a handful of other guys, Kendall Gerville, who Florida's involved with too, another defensive lineman. All right, one 3-star I want to ask you about real quick, Blake. Jari Carr, there's some picks in for Tennessee, but Florida feels pretty good. Can they get it done this weekend? What do you think?
He's got a commitment date set for June 25th. So when you see a guy that's set a date and they've got all these official visits that they're going to take, you seem to think that that's a guy that's probably going to wait it out. They're going to take their visits, whether they're for enjoyment, whether they're there for, really trying to sink in and learn more about these schools. I do think that from talking to him, it was pretty clear, at least, that Tennessee did make a big impression on him. But that was his first visit. He's a guy that's from Ocala. We've talked to him a couple times outside of the facility when he's visited Florida, and he's been – I don't even know if I could give you a number, a lot. He's been to Florida by far more than anywhere else. So mom is a fan of Florida, grew up around the area too. So I don't know that he's one that pops this weekend just because he did just set that date and it's so close to after his official visits. Yeah, there's some Tennessee buzz, and he did speak glowingly that visit, but Florida is really confident in this guy, and they have felt confident for a while. And I've even heard that, like, the thinking from people around Florida is that if Florida doesn't land this guy, then something had to have seriously gone wrong. So we'll put that theory to the test as he takes his official visits.
I don't think they're going to want you to write that. Yeah, if he picks another school, I think they're not going to want you to touch that one. But I got to tell you, you and I really got to know Jari. We met him when he was a young guy, a sophomore. And, I remember talking, like, you and I physically, we didn't think he was anything special a couple years ago. But Rob Sale, John DeCoster obviously is newer to the staff, but Billy Napier, they're in the business of not just evaluating guys. We need to point this out. They're in the business of looking at a 15-year-old and knowing based on his hand size, shoe size, body type, what he may look like 2-3 years down the road. And so they knew what he was going to look like. And now Blake, he looks like an SEC lineman. He is a big kid and really kind of a gentle giant when he talks to people like us. And, that would be a significant get. He's from Ocala originally. I want to say his mom went to North Marion, he told us. So, again, North Marion.
He went to Forest. He played at Forest, I believe. No, sorry, Trinity Catholic.
Trinity Catholic. Yeah, exactly. Well, they've got a lot of Forest influence at Trinity Catholic. John Brantley coached there for years. John Brantley, the dad of the former, well, actually, he was a Florida quarterback too, but the Florida Gator quarterback from the 1970s was their coach for years, and he played at Forest down there, which had a legendary program under, I believe his name was Brent Hall, if my memory's correct. But point being, Ocala kid, North Marion. I mean, look, the Gator blood's there. But we'll see. They got to close the deal, though. I mean, that's the thing. The longer it goes on with a kid from a local area that you want, they're not in the boat. It makes you just wonder what's going on. But it's still very early in the cycle, obviously. But Jari Carr, I think we both think ultimately he probably ends up with Florida. But, Tennessee's historically, believe it or not, recruited offensive linemen halfway decent from the state of Florida. So, Blake, is there one guy on this list you say, this is my final question, but one guy on this list that you think maybe could pop this weekend?
I was actually looking now. I think Jabari Lucas, you mentioned him earlier, the 3-star offensive lineman out of Glade Central, cousin of Kelvin and Fred Taylor. He's got those Florida ties there. I've heard consistently, at least over the last couple months, that this is a guy that Billy Napier really likes, that Florida went to see during the spring. They like the size. They like the way he moves. I think that that's a guy that Florida would love to take. They are known for having some of these, kind of under the radar, all these buzzwords that Florida fans hate hearing at this point, of these guys that, maybe need a year or two with some seasoning in the college program, but end up, have a chance to be a really good player. And I think that that's one that they see Jabari Lucas being. So I think that that's one to watch. I think they'd be glad to take him. He's a green light guy all day from what I've heard.
Is he? That's interesting what you mentioned, because Florida has done most of its work on the offensive line through high school recruiting, right? Yeah, Crenshaw Dixon was a poor guy, but I think most of the guys are high school guys. And because of that, and because it's worked out, they've now got a true first team and essentially a true second team. And I guess what I'm trying to say is they can continue to recruit guys that may need 2 or 3 years to develop, because everything is sort of lined up right now with the first team and the second team. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to explain what I'm trying to say, but they're going to lose a couple guys this year. Then some of the second teamers will move up next year. Some of the third teamers will move up to second. In other words, there's a real ladder there. They've built a real, I don't know if it was by design or not, but that's sort of the way it's worked. So you can take a guy like this, and maybe he's not ready for 2 or 3 years, but if it works out, it works out. And they've proven, you look at the guys they have, most of these guys were developmental guys, the guys, whether they were signed by the prior staff or not. But interesting. Blake, that is it. We're going to have more later in the week. Like I said, I think with Corey Bender, what we may do is kind of rank the guys most likely to end up in the Florida class from this weekend. But look, it's a huge official visit weekend, 18 guys. Make sure you go to GatorsOnline.com. Blake Alderman right there and Corey Bender are going to have a lot of content throughout this week, and they're going to keep you in the loop throughout the weekend. So for Blake Alderman, I am Keith Niebuhr. This was the Gators Online Recruiting Show. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care.